My pleasure to welcome to the Rhema studio the Reverend George Penk. George, nice to see you.
Same to you, Andrew.
Hey, talking in this week's 7-minute sermon on the topic of prayer, and hey, this is one which I always get hung up on. I think it's in 1st or 2nd Thessalonians, can't remember which one, where it says pray without ceasing. Because honestly, who's got the energy for that? Talk without ceasing. There's some people that can do that reasonably well.
We've noticed.
But to pray without ceasing, to be constantly in an attitude of prayer, is that achievable?
Well, there's a quote that I quite like, which I actually start this week's 7-minute sermon with, and it's attributed to Martin Luther, and the quote says, "To be a Christian without prayer is no more possible than to be alive without breathing." So. The reason I like that quote is I think it gives us a sense of just the importance, the significance, the absolute fundamental, I guess, character of prayer for the Christian life. But just because something's really important, just because it's essential even, doesn't mean it's necessarily easy, right?
Yeah, exactly. Although I do get it. Breathe without ceasing. That's just good medical advice, right? So, I mean, a wonderful metaphor there. But hey, following that metaphor through, as natural as breathing, you just breathe in and out. You don't even notice that you're doing it. But praying and having a constant attitude of prayer, there's a little bit more conscious effort involved in that. There's, I suppose, an alignment of the spirit and being aware of God in our life as we're doing that.
Yeah, and I think it's something that we can grow in, that we can learn more about and how to do. I don't know about you, but I think for me, for much of my life, I've had this assumption that everybody knows how to pray. Yep. But if you look at the particular passage I'm focusing on this week is from Luke chapter 11, and it starts by saying, "One day Jesus was praying in a certain place. When he finished, one of his disciples said to him, 'Lord, teach us to pray, just as John taught his disciples.'" So those 5 words, "Lord, teach us to pray," I find them hugely encouraging. Because if you think about who's asking this of Jesus, these are the disciples who are seeing him minister in the flesh. You're watching him teach these amazing things and heal people and cast out demons and all that stuff. These guys have an absolutely sort of ringside seat, right? And yet they have to ask how to pray. And I'm thinking, 2,000 years later, if it's okay for them to struggle with prayer or to feel like they're not there yet and they need to learn and they need to grow in this, actually it's okay for me too.
And it also, I think, says something about the way in which Jesus prayed must have been different, because, I mean, in the context that they're from, it's not like they've never prayed before. There would have been, prayer would have been a part of their upbringing, and perhaps particular prayers said by a priest or a rabbi in those spaces. But the way in which Jesus was praying, that was obviously different to them. It was different than their lived experience and what they'd seen happen at the synagogue. The way Jesus prayed, a more natural, a more relational, a more intimate form of prayer.
Yeah, and I think it's important to remember perhaps that there are different types of prayer. Perhaps what Jesus modeled, if they want to learn more of, was different from what they had observed. But I mean, for us today, and if you look at the Christian church around the world, you see lots of different types of prayer. And I personally think that each of them has value, that we can learn from them. If you kind of look at the source material, if you like, if you look at the Bible, there are lots of different types of prayer in there. There are prayers of praise and thanksgiving, anger and laments, asking, interceding. I mean, that last one of interceding is perhaps, again, I don't know if I can speak on other people's behalf, but for me at least, that's kind of what I have mostly thought of as prayer.
Shopping list prayers.
Exactly.
Hey, here's all the things, God, I need you to fix. And that's a part of the Lord's Prayer as well,
Yeah, and I think it's very valid to ask God. I mean, God is our loving Heavenly Father who cares about the details of our lives. It's fine to bring those things to him and ask for his help and want to see him at work in our lives through those specific things. But we shouldn't stop there, because that's not all that prayer is. And again, it's very clear, both in the Bible and the lived experience of the church throughout the centuries, in those 2 millennia since the time of Jesus. There are lots of different types of prayer, and each of them have value, I think.
Yeah, no, that's super good stuff. I mean, there's not hassling your Anglicanism, but sometimes there are set prayers. There's sometimes where we go, okay, the leader says this, but we say this other bit, and there's a certain liturgy and routine, which is a good thing. And hey, the Lord's Prayer is often a part of that in many different churches and denominations. Other times we just come to God and speak as the Spirit leads, and ask God to give us the words to say in prayer. Also a strongly biblical model.
Yeah, I think so. And again, there's value in both of those approaches. I mean, I'm a liturgy geek, as you may know, Andrew. I love that stuff. I love my tradition and the structure. And for me, it's not empty religion. For me, there's actually wisdom in leaning into what has worked for people throughout the centuries and making some of their prayers my own. And that's effectively what liturgy is, I guess.
Yeah.
But it's not just about words I read on the page. I think it's really valuable if we can have some of each, if you like.
Yeah.
I guess I'm saying that I don't think it's one or the other. There's no kind of one size fits all approach when it comes to prayer.
And hey, started this conversation with a joke about how I talk too much. That's part of the problem as well in prayer. Yes, pray without ceasing, but also make some space to hear from God in that. Prayer is a conversation. It's not a rant. You know, that there is spaces in that opportunity for quietness and contemplation and waiting on God.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a two-way thing. I think we often think of it as just a one-way street, if you like. It's us talking, God listening. But actually, if we can move beyond that and consider that prayer as a two-way thing, if it's a relationship, I think that might be a helpful way of thinking of it, in terms of us talking to God, but also us listening to what He is saying. Because, I mean, if we think about the relationships in our lives, maybe sometimes maybe it's me speaking, another person listening, but maybe at other times it's the other way around. And, you know, that relationship with another person might look different on different days, depending what we're going through, depending what's kind of in front of us at the time. And maybe it's the same in terms of our relationship with God.
And hey, however long we are in the faith, however long we've been in that relationship with God, always an opportunity to go deeper and perhaps to relearn how to pray, just as those disciples asked Jesus, which of course led to the Lord's Prayer. George, you get into this in much more detail in this week's 7-minute sermon. People, of course, can subscribe to that wherever they get their podcasts, and I would recommend that they do so. But hey, thanks for popping in. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Andrew. See you next time.
Hey, thanks very much for joining us in the Rhema studio. Thanks very much for watching the interview. It's kind of nice to have an audience, actually. And if you did like what you watched, then do give us a like, do give us the thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more interviews like that one, or perhaps even better, subscribe and those interviews will come straight to you. Don't forget to turn on your notifications, and we'll see you in the next one. Cheers.